The fuel retail industry is attractive to many, and for the longest time black people couldn't own a service station. Now the picture has changed as they have some ownership stake in an industry where there are more than 5,000 service stations. But that's not enough. It's not cheap, and there are fears that deregulation will slow transformation gains made. Sibonelo Mbatha is one of the owners who have a few sites to his name, and he's sending the elevator down to help people to own a site or two.
Reality is that it is not cheap, and so funding is probably the first or ranks number one in terms of the hindrances that every now and then people say, but how do we access funding? How do we access funding? So it has really been a challenge. But the industry itself, I think it's fairly sustainable, and I think it's quite resilient, and that we've seen over the past 2 years, even after COVID-19 and looting.
Even though the ownership structure looks different now, black entrepreneurs still face challenges such as access to infrastructure, finance and markets.
In the past, it was an open market. It was a willing buyer, willing seller. But I think as the transformation in the industry started taking traction, and there was always an issue around how do you determine the price? The seller wanted the maximum price they could get. The buyer wants the least they could pay. And so that is why we came in, and with other industry stakeholders such as the Fuel Retailers Association and also the financial institutions, and it had to be determined that we need to have a formula which is an industry-wide formula right now, which is a 36-month EBITDA. This is so that's really basically how you determine the value of a service station. And of course, there will always be gray areas there and there, but the reality is that at least there is something that you can work off, as a starting point.
According to the South African Petroleum Industry Association, the fuel subsector contributes about 8% to the country's GDP, creating more than 700,000 direct and indirect job opportunities that make up 5% of total formal employment in the country. Karen Keylocks, the National Franchise Manager at Nedbank Business Banking, says they're seeing an increase in particularly black women owning service stations. Having said that, the speed of transformation is still relatively slow.
I don't think it's moving fast enough. I think it's still very slow from where we're coming from. It's only in the last 2 years have I suddenly seen this upliftment coming through from the various oil companies. And I think that could be because government is starting to drive transformation within the fuel industry. But it is still very, very slow.
But as those who are already in it can tell you, it doesn't come cheap. One can expect to pay anything from 3 million rands up to 17 million rands for the most lavish site. Nedbank says it has already financed deals of more than 300 million.
We are now starting to see the BEE candidates are starting to come through now. We're starting to see the first, obviously, choice would be our lovely black ladies, and then we would look at our gentlemen. But the important thing is there's definitely this upliftment where we're seeing, and even partnerships. So please just bear in mind, it's not all about the individual coming in and him or she having to run the site on their own. There's always that opportunity of partnering with the existing operator.
With all this progress having been made, both Mbatha and Keylocks say talk of deregulation is unsettling.
So that is why, the talk of deregulation is such a thorny issue right now, because it talks directly to the sustainability of this industry. Just to give you an idea, because many people always think that deregulation is good for consumers. The reality, however, is that you will understand how capitalist market work. If we compete, I'm going to suffocate my competition. I'm going to eliminate competition. And once I have eliminated competition and I'm the only one, then I'm going to double my price, because consumers will have nowhere else to go because I've eliminated competition. And unfortunately, people, particularly in the far out, in the rural areas, will suffer the brunt of deregulation if that were to be implemented?
It will not work. Then we might actually fail in transformation, because a lot of our sites that we are doing and are funding are between the 6 and 10 million rand mark, even smaller. We're starting to see the 3 million sites coming in. If we're going to do transformation, and if we are serious about transformation, and the government wants to go deregulation, we must can it right now.
Astron Energy, formerly known as Caltex, operates the second largest petroleum retail network in the country with over 850 service stations. Its head of retail, Tebogo Mekwa, says the group committed to placing more BE candidates at its sites.
We've got a very clear program that we've embarked on a couple of years ago, which we're obviously refreshing all the time. But we are very clear that there is a need for transformation within our network, especially for the sites that we own the properties at. So where we have better control of who operates those sites. When the contracts come to an end, we then use that opportunity to install a transformation candidate.
He says in the last 2 years, just under 20 transformation candidates have been placed at its existing sites of Astron.
Most of the time when you bring the transformation candidates, it's either they have never been in the oil industry before. We try and bring people with some entrepreneurial flair or some experience in running businesses, because as much as they may not have the experience in running a forecourt, but we would like for them to have some entrepreneurial flair. And then we provide them with mentorship programs around just our specific industry and how to survive it.
Mekwa says to ensure success of a site lies in being fully present. He says the days of relying on the proximity of a site, hoping it will do well, are done and dusted. He says it is important to interact with consumers and understand their needs, as this is the only way one can stay in the game. Diabosito, SABC News, Johannesburg.